Understanding the Evolution of Threat Intelligence in Corporate Security. We are delighted to have a fantastic panel moderated by the one and only Chris Story, Senior Consultant, Anomaly Management Services, and of course, co-host Conversations in Close Protection. On our panel, we have Chuck Tobin, CEO at Risk International, Victor Villalobos, VP Protective Services and Intelligence at MUFG, and Kelly Moye, Vice President, Security Operations at North America, GM Financial. I'm really looking forward to this panel. What are we going to be talking about today, Chris?
Well, today we're talking about threat intelligence and how if it is the cornerstone to monitor corporate security modernization, or if there's what tools they include and what modern threat intelligence program look like.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I will leave you all in Chris's capable hands, but I will be here in the background.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks for having us. And to my esteemed panel members, thank you for joining. It looks like I'm in a way better spot than you, but I won't tout that too much. So, I think earlier in the panels we've talked about what might define corporate security modernization. But leading off with that question, is threat intelligence the cornerstone of corporate security modernization? Victor, can we get you to answer that for us?
Yeah, I do believe that the cornerstone of modernization of any organizations, both public and private, is the intelligence department, or at least bringing in good intelligence. And the reason why is because, like any warfighter knows, you don't go into a battle without having a good understanding of the battlefield. And so with that said, intelligence is information. And so if you have the right information, you're able to provide the right decision-making, meaning that do we need a new policy or do we need a new procedure based on the new threat environment? As same goes for even at the tactical level, right? We're going into an event, if we want to do like protective security of an executive, just knowing the information prior helps you identify the risks that are going into it, right? Not always do we need a firearm to go into an event, because sometimes it's now warranted based on the risk. And with that comes the intelligence. So I believe that modernization of intelligence is the cornerstone of modernization of corporate security.
Okay, so essentially to summarize, you're saying intelligence can feed your operational requirements, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that?
All intelligence is good intelligence, whether it's human or computer analytics, whatever that is, but it's a pulse point that we monitor, EP, executive protection, or just the everyday operations of your buildings, the old-fashioned bomb threats, pandemics, anything along those lines, BLM protests, all those relevant things that have happened in the last 2 years. That is like a fire hose of information coming at your team. And I think the key is, listening to these panels and seeing what other tools people are using to gather that intelligence. It's not a one-stop shop at this point. We use multiple vendors to get information, and then you have to have a team to decipher and to see if it's relevant for your business, geofencing, things like that. So yes, it's a matter of good intelligence, but you have to scribe it. And my team is working right now with our cyber team on developing a more holistic, enhanced monitoring process where they can enhance monitoring from a DLP standpoint, internal, externally, as well as my team from the boots on the ground standpoint, and my investigations team as far as DSO or a threat that may be pending. So if you put all those things together, yes, it's great information and good information, but then you have to have the team to put it all together to say, hey, something doesn't look right here. And that goes back to that hiring the right folks, training them, and keeping them, evolving as things change. And as we know, have changed rapidly in the last 2 years.
Okay. So thanks for that, Kelly. So you kind of unpacked a whole lot there that have been talked about on previous panels, right? So some folks opine that modernization is tool selection or or getting the right tools, connecting the dots. Um, and you talked about cyber function, physical security. I think you're talking about executive protection. You did as well. So and we talked about the volume, essentially the volume of information all that puts in, having the right people to analyze, to understand what is going on in the organization. How do you define the right tool, and then at the same time, how do you define the right team? Because they're constantly changing, right? And they definitely shift off of organizational needs. So Kelly, I'm going to ask, because it's almost a follow-up question to what you're saying. I'm going to ask you to answer that question, and then Chuck, I'd like you to weigh in on that as well after Kelly does.
I think you always hire the right people. You have to hire people that have the ability to grow and be diverse. And I don't mean diverse in the things we talk about. I mean diverse in everything: security, human resources. We work in a financial institution, so on a financial fraud. You have to be diverse in your abilities to grow and to identify new threats or concerns in our business, number one. So you can't change your team, obviously, often. As quick as the opportunities have come to us, we've had to be very flexible in what we prioritize. And I think, how do I identify that vendor or that tool? I take my team of really smart people and I have them sit down in the room with these guys, and then we try to fit the puzzle piece into the puzzle. If it's a good fit, if it's right for us, and does it have a long-term benefit? And long-term is what, 1 or 2 or 3 years now, with the move of technology and how quick it's moving. It's hard to vet that. What it takes is a lot of oil in the gears to keep that moving. But again, I feel very lucky is that I have a very good team, and they're always thinking down the road. They're not thinking rear view mirror, they're thinking windshield. So that is our motto here. Hope that answered your question.
No, it did. So essentially you're setting the requirements based on operational needs, but not only just now, but in the future. And then that's how you and your team identify what tools they need based off those requirements. Chuck, would you mind, adding to that piece from your perspective?
Well, I don't know, Chris, if I can jump in and offer as much with the Tweety birds in the background there, and the fact that the esteemed Chris Story is doing this. I would have worn a coat and tie if I'd known you were the moderator. Sorry, Chris. So I would add first that going back on that first question, I really think that we've all experienced situations where we get into that C-suite and we're dealing with a crisis. And because there's emotional issues and there's cognitive biases, the discussion gets misled down some other path. And absent of a true intelligence program that's actually begin to look at the intelligence requirements and can funnel the conversation, we get detoured and we end up focusing on projects that are not really priorities for the organization. So we've got to do that. And then to your second piece there about the conversation about the right people. I mean, I'll go back to Alan's comment earlier about selecting executive protection professionals. Chris, I know you and I have had this conversation before. How do we know we're getting the right people in the door? You've got your workplace competencies we all look for. Can they manage Excel? Can they use Word? Can they do basic tools? You've got your industry competencies, so they understand their job as an analyst, but you've got to think about those personal competencies. If they're just not a good fit for the team, they're going to create chaos. And that's going to make it harder for you to get the analytical work done, because you have, narcissistic personalities, you have, antisocial personalities. So even if it's an EP team, even if it's an analyst team, similar to the EP team, why not consider not just writing test, but personality test to make sure they're a proper fit for your organization? I think a lot of we do training for Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and we train their agents in threat assessment investigations. Every one of their classes, you have analysts and agents sitting side by side, treated as equals in the effort to understand the scope of the threats. And I think that that's a big part of that personality, is making sure they can not be perceived or themselves act as there's subservient to the whole effort, because they're key to what we do in converging the intelligence platforms to have the right people who have that personality to drive the conversation. You muted, Chris.
So what I'm hearing is essentially making to ensure that you have the right people. And then of course, what Kelly's talking about, I think Victor as well, is hiring for potential, not necessarily, hey, you've got X amount of years in law enforcement or whatever the case is, as the older studies have been. But as we look at these at the threatscape, as Victor talked about, which some people like or don't like, but it's pretty accurate. What are we dealing with now? What are we dealing with in the future? And how do we hire those folks to work with the tools that are within our organization to help and align with our organizational goals to help us defeat those threats in our individual threatscape? Would that accurately sum up, the overall thought process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Because I think that becomes the next piece is each of you have talked about, essentially different versions of threat as it applies to you. Kelly talked about a lot of digital threat aligned with physical security. Victor did as well. And then, and Chuck, you kind of talked in broad terms, but your, your expertise is the human threat, for the most part, right? And that threat assessment. So what is that? Do each of your programs, as you see them, or the programs of the future, do they each align with each part of those, or is that organizational as you see? Victor, I'd like to go back to you on that. Like, do you have a focus on broad threat, or do you just only focus on the human threat or physical security, or is it becoming more converged from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's becoming more converged. I just recently, actually about an hour ago, I had a conversation exactly about this, was with our insider threat team, which is actually under our cybersecurity side. And, they're talking about workplace violence, for example, and that's a physical threat and mostly handled by HR, ER, and corporate security. And then they're talking about internal fraud, which then is handled by our corporate investigations team and corporate security. So you're starting to see that divergence, so that threat plane is starting to become level, right? Or becoming the earth is becoming flatter, some people say, because you no longer see it just in your world, but you're trying to look for leakage in everybody's environment. And if we're not cross-pollinating, and to echo Kelly, is we have to go for that emergence, right? That joint element by also creating, for example, I come from the military and the executive protection, and then grew into an investigational role, and then grew into and then started learning about cyber and insider threat at the cyber level, because I'm starting to see that divergence. And as a leader, I have to be able to be there, right? Gear and guide. So I think things are, you have to be there at every level.
Okay, so we'll go to Chuck for your perspective on that. Thanks, Victor. How do you see it from your perspective with organization as you approach and support them from a threat perspective?
I would mirror exactly what Victor just said. The fact is that the insider threat programs, the intel programs, all of them need to find a way to converge. When you look at, like I mentioned this probably a dozen times in the past, but the 2016 Carnegie Mellon study showed that convergence between the pathway to violence from an insider threat for sabotage, espionage, versus somebody who commits an act of violence. They have the same ideation and grievance and behaviors. It's when they make the decision that violence is acceptable, they deviate from that path. So we want to make sure that we have that conversation when we're looking at what are our threats, whether they're coming from an external shareholder or a person who just hates the corporation, or it's internal employee going after the crown jewels. All of them present a different threat vector for us to understand. But if we don't have that conversation and begin to incorporate that dialogue with your cyber team, you're going to miss them. And I see it almost in the way Victor was describing. In a lot of organizations, these silos exist. HR deals with the employee who's going to go rogue. And security deals with the external threat that just happens to show up at the doorstep. And IT deals with this cyber actor. Well, what if it's the same person, right? It's an employee who has begun to deteriorate. They begin to probe places they shouldn't go. They begin to search for things at work they shouldn't be searching for. Meanwhile, they're sending nastygrams on social media when they get home because they're pissed off. And then they start to evidence themselves within HR as a person who's a poor performer. If those three silos aren't beginning to talk, this whole thing crumbles, and they become a key risk factor unbeknownst to anybody.
Okay, so this is awesome and interesting because everybody's kind of talking around it, right? But it sounds like really convergence isn't just necessarily physical security and cybersecurity, which has been a significant topic, in the past years. But really, convergence is aligning everybody that has some level of security or threat interest together before there's an issue, so that everybody can see the two types of threats, right? At least at this point, the insider threat and the external threat, which may actually be one and the same. So Kelly, do you see that as corporate security modernization, supporting intelligence by bringing in those other internal partners, HR, employee relations, even managers, because they're the ones that really see, are seeing these behavioral indicators first. Security often gets them on the back end.
I'm nodding feverishly over here, Chuck, because I felt like you were in my head. We know the silos. We understand the silos. We have been hammering away at those silos for 6 years now. And it is amazing how when you come together and people see the value of your organization, especially because my team is the physical security, the investigations team, and GSOC teams, they come to us for everything now, violence related or external threat related or internal threat related. We have a title, HTVs, harassment, threats, violence. And, we have put together such a solid package that the other branches come to us first and foremost. They seek us out now. And there's a good and a bad with that, is that we get pulled, like today, my team who's on this call today, we've been pulled in 20 directions today on hiring and breaking down of a vendor who does our contract to hire. And then we have 2 workplace violence things happening. And so we're being pulled in a million directions, all because they really revere our teams as being the go-to to mitigate risk. And now that we're working with the CSIRT team to put together a really strong tool that, from what you said, Chuck, they go home and they tweet out, we have our geofencing. I want to kill my boss. But at work, they're poor performers. HR knows that, yet they got arrested 2 days ago for burning down the church. We have a tool that's going to tell us, hey, they were arrested 2 days ago. And then what my team does, pull all that together. We reach out to HR. We have a threat assessment team. We then we share that with them without a name. We don't give them the name of the person. We just give them a history of all these things, and then they make a decision on next steps, whether that's enhanced monitoring, HR action for termination, whatever that is based on a blind review of the actual facts. And that way they take the emotion out, they take the I don't know that person piece. And I think that's worked well for us. And it's something a lot of companies don't do, especially long term and companies that have long tenure. When that's Bobby, and Bobby always acts that way. Bobby likes guns. Bobby's just mad. His wife left him, his dog died, all the things we hate to hear. And they just brush it off. Well, because we do it in a blind way, there is no emotional attachment to that person. It's a factual rendition of what occurred. And that has helped us tremendously. So Chuck, right there with you. Victor, same. It's a crazy world, and I kind of love it, but it keeps us busy.
Well, it sounds like, Kelly, I would have done a cartwheel with what you were saying, but it's just maybe too.
The birds are holding you down.
I might not. Yeah, exactly. I might not recover from that, but what you're saying really resonated, and I think really that is almost the definition of corporate security modernization is getting away from the silos that, hey, only security can deal with this, bringing tools in to support threat intelligence information, but then bringing our partners in earlier as well to show what we can do, which like that, you've got a really great problem to have, which was everybody in your organization sees you as a key stakeholder in the problem solving piece. So we're not just catching problems, but we're identifying them up front, pushing them back to our stakeholders for decision making or action and guidance, and then add, rinse, repeat with each of the threats that come on board. So well done on that piece. So we can kind of define as corporate security overall. We've really broken it down to cyber and physical, right? And then as part of physical, executive protection, fit out your structure. As an overall corporate security function, what is it that we're protecting today? Are we protecting people, data, property, physical assets, intangibles? How do you define that, Victor?
I'm sorry, Chris. I was actually reading Alan's Sequoia's comments. Can you please repeat that?
Hey, really, what I was just trying to get us to define or get your opinion on defining what is it that corporate security is really responsible for protecting. And not maybe not necessarily in your organization, but overall, right? Because we've got InfoSecure, InfoSec, we got cyber, we've got all these disparate organizations. But how do you see that corporate security's primary responsibilities are changing, or are they? Is it just protecting locations and people?
Yeah, I honestly don't think that it's no longer just assets, right? In this case, assets being physical locations and people. I think now that the threat environment's changed, particularly now because we've started becoming remote. So the threat environment has changed from assets, from people, to now also becoming people focused, location focused, and now also supporting that mind meld between the cyber and the physical, right? Because they're becoming, it's almost starting to be blind in what's an asset, what's an asset in the cyberspace. So, and then they're asking for our ability to look at, investigate MO, because in the end, technology is technology and that's it. But people are the users of that tool. Does that make sense? So
yeah, yes,
we know people as investigators, and so now that's what we're trying to achieve, because we can better analyze people.
Okay, so that leads to the kind of like the next question, which is based on the extremely distributed workforce, which for the foreseeable future most of us will have to deal with. How do we as corporate security use threat intelligence to protect those people if we believe that we've said, hey, the organization says, hey, our organization works from home, which kind of makes us responsible for that. How do we use threat intelligence information to protect that population that is now outside the castle? And then what do we do about the information vectors that they might be getting, receiving, and acting on in the space? Chuck, I'll go with you on that one, sir. The two-part question.
Yeah, I was going to say a two-part question, so I'll have to probably reflect on what the first part was. The first thing I think we think about how we use protected intelligence, though, is it's really key to informing our strategy for risk planning, right? So if we've got an event occurring in Mexico, for instance, and we've done our protected intelligence planning, that should certainly inform the strategy that's going to make up the size of the package. And whether or not we're going to use misinformation, whether or not we're going to have decoys or ghost routes run, there's a lot of things that are going to be in play that I think our intelligence package is going to help inform from the EP side of things. I think when you get into that remote side of it, though, and the remote workers, that really does put a huge burden on any corporate security program, because now you're not just worried about incidents and events that are occurring in your central geography. Now you've got people who work for corporations that are scattered across the globe, and it's almost impossible, I think, for many of them, and maybe Kelly or Victor might disagree, to be fully accountable for all those destinations. I mean, I live in Texas, and I see more California plates in Texas than I do sometimes than I do Texas plates. So
You're welcome.
how is a corporation, yeah, how is a corporation planning for that to make sure that they understand where these people reside relative to their depth to be able to search all the different geographies now that they've been dispersed to? So I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. I'll turn it over to the other team and see what they have.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Great. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that? The remote workforce and using protective intelligence to support them.
You know, I've been working on this Intrado E911 with the Ray Baum Act. I don't know if anybody else is doing that, but if you're familiar with the Ray Baum Act, if someone's using a soft phone from home and calling customers, their number has to come up at their home address now if they dial 911 from that soft phone. Well, that's not easy to do, right? Because no one really wants to give their home address to their employer, or if they're moving to Starbucks, which they shouldn't be working from a open platform. So there's a lot of things culturally that working from home, and now new federal laws have come out saying you have to abide by this law. If I dial 911 right now from my cell phone, it has to give my home address, and getting people to comply, right? It's just another cog in the wheel, and being a part in this company of all the different moving parts so that we can lend the security arm and offer, hey, you know, that home address with a 911, my GSOC should know that as well in case they need to make sure the services have arrived. And they're, you know, the open and home workforce to me is no different than having them in the office. I really don't think it's changed much. Our need and our requirements are still important to them. We have security securing buildings, but from a intellectual standpoint and a forensic or cyber standpoint, we've never been busier. So we look to avoid mishaps. Like, we don't allow people to print from home, obviously, because it's, you know, customer content, data breaches, things like that. If you have to print, you go in the office and we track it. So a lot of things happen this quickly. And when the pandemic, now it seems 2 years have gone by and it's old hat.
Right.
It doesn't mean there's any less fraud. It just means that we've kept up with the pace of the activity.
Okay. All right. So, you know, risk intelligence tools help us, you know, define and identify them in the risk landscape or the threat landscape. Yet, you know, we uncover more as the environment changes and the cycle continues. So I see Phelim there nodding his head. That it's his version of the hook, which means that we've reached the end of our time. But I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for their input and their thought processes, and I look forward to connecting again in the future. Thank you.
Very
Fantastic.
good job, Chris.
Thanks,
Yes.
Chris and panelists.
Thanks,
Kelly Green today for
oh,
St. Patty's Day. Kelly Green.
I should probably swap my tie out in the next break. I'm totally not wearing green today. I should really. Thanks ever so much, Chris, for a fantastic panel. Thanks Victor, Chris, Kelly, and Chuck. Let's give them a big virtual round of applause. Everybody is still chatting and wants to keep it going. So please do join the Discord channel where more chat can take place, and actually more networking can take place because of all those things. So I'll implore you to keep it going in Discord. Thanks very much. And I look forward to seeing you in the audience.
Thanks, everyone. Really good panel, guys. Thank you.